All right, now, obviously, we can go down the narrative road about your movie career, but since we are at the Television Academy, and since
Yeah.
I don't want this to turn into a hostage situation, which it could easily, I'm going to go to sort of the next significant chapter in television, which is really important for a number of reasons. I want to talk about Comic Relief, which was started in 1986.
Right.
So obviously, you already have this relationship with HBO. So talk about sort of how Comic Relief came to be.
In 1986, Chris Albrecht and a producer named Bob Zamuda comes to us with a concept of doing a telethon on HBO, 4 hours, to raise money for the homeless, medical aid for the homeless, to provide shelters with more money and medical care for the people who are America's disgrace, living on the streets of America. And they wanted Robin and Whoopi and I to be the three hosts. And we all said yes. So they planned the first show, which was at the Universal Amphitheater. And this was uncharted territory, to get all these comedians together in like a Farm Aid kind of deal, but with funny people. And there'd be, I don't know how many comedians, and we'd sell T-shirts and other things and shoot mini documentaries and so on and so forth to roll into it, human interest pieces. Produced by John Moffat and Pat Lee. And we meet about 2 weeks before, and we all start thinking about a funny opening. How could we do an opening together?
Now, you knew Robin a bit before this.
I knew well, but not, I can't say great.
You'd never worked together before.
No, we did that HBO
Oh, that's
special,
right.
and we'd done, fooled around a little bit, but, and great respect for each other. We were managed by the same, by David and Buddy, so we knew each other well, but not like what was about to happen.
And then Whoopi, you didn't know at all.
I didn't know Whoopi very well at all. I just met her when she did her Broadway show once, and that was it. So now we're thrown together for this common cause, and it couldn't have been more delightful and more creative and more impactful in our personal and performing lives than getting to do the Comic Reliefs together. And the first one was, we wrote an opening and we did this opening and it got really good reaction. And then as we walked off stage at the amphitheater after doing this opening, Pat Lee said to us, the phones are ringing. And the three of us started to cry. And they're out there. They're listening. They're donating. And we raised a significant amount of money on the first one. And we were then brothers and a sister for all the rest of them, and had some extraordinary moments together. Because what was great about it was the whole comedy world came out. All these people wanted to perform. I remember we had to convince the producers. We wanted Dave Chappelle on the show. It was, I think, one of his first television appearances. Shandling was hilarious. We did tributes to veteran Jerry Lewis came out one night. Dick Van Dyke Show reunion.
I remember on that
the
very first
Honeymooners.
Comic Relief, didn't you have Sid and Carl do the Professor Von Know-It-All piece?
And so we had moments that if you're comedy nerds, you just want, I can't believe what I'm seeing. And for us to be the the chariot drivers of it was an extraordinary experience. And what was also phenomenal was HBO paid every bill. So whatever money came in went out, right? The show didn't have to pay for anything. They paid all the expenses. So we would, the organization that was overseeing all the money would pick out shelters across the country that they deemed the most needy. And so I remember there was the Venice Family Clinic, and then around the country. I remember going to Washington with Robin and Whoopi, and we get in Congress, and we have Ted Kennedy hosted a lunch for us in the office, and then we speak in the Mike Mansfield room, which was awesome, and we then bring a check for $250,000 to the House of Ruth, a shelter for women, and we buy them a medical van, and we drove up in the van. And I'll tell you, it's great to be in front of people and perform and make them laugh. But when you're doing something that means something to them and helps them, and you're part of it, and you hand them the keys to this van, and they hug you and they look at you with tears in their eyes, and some of them are victims of spousal abuse, or they're ill, or they've been living on the streets, and you make their life easier. For Robin and Whoopi and I, that bonded us as family. That's almost like a brand or a tattoo, on in my heart, actually. And all the shows that we did together, all of those years, I couldn't wait to be with them, because the hang time, finding the funny was on stage was always amazing. There's some moments with Robin and I on stage and Whoopi, but there's some moments that Robin and I just go off.
Oh, I remember
that are extraordinary to
in
me.
that first Comic Relief, the piece that you and Robin did as two chorus boys, Betty's Boys.
Betty's Boys, yeah.
Didn't that come about because Bette Midler was supposed to be on the show? And
No. Betty's Boys was a piece that we actually did on my variety show together.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it was a piece that we did on my variety show. The concept was the male singers for Debbie Reynolds, and they rehearse without her, and there's always a spotlight where she's going to be. So it was a rehearsal for these two chorus guys who were, sort of bitchy with each other and very funny. So it was rehearsing of the closing number of Betty's Boys. So we did that again, and other pieces. He and I played Siegfried and Roy. We did the show in Radio City Music Hall, and Siegfried and Roy had just performed there. So all the stagehands were like going crazy that it was so we were slapping each other and hitting, and it all worked out great. But it was the downtime, Dan. It was the talking time that for me and Robin and Whoopi, it's very hard to explain to anybody how you can crawl into someone else's mind and heart just by the common goal of helping people. And that happened for the three of us.
So I want to, just because he's no longer with us, I want to talk about how you paid tribute to Robin at the 2014 Emmy Awards. It was so beautiful and so moving. It must have been unbelievably hard.
That's the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Because he was only gone a couple of weeks at the time, and the Academy came to me would you do this? And so I said, okay. And it's just trying to make sense of it for everybody, including myself, which still is 4 years later, still trying to do that. And at the rehearsal, the camera blocking, I walked out, and his beautiful big picture of him was up, and I looked, I saw him, I said, I can't do this, and I walked off. I couldn't talk. And I regrouped, and I came out, and I got through it. And then next day is the Emmys. Now 700 Sundays was nominated, and it's the category right before I have to come out and do right before In Memoriam. And we lose, so now they come in to get me, and I'm not happy no matter what. And I've got my my heart's broken for my friend, and now I'm just, the award meant nothing at that point, but I still was pissed. You can't help it. And now you have to get into that mind to go out there and make yourself, don't break down. Don't break down. And I walked and I did it the best I could, and try to tell some funny stories that were personal, and then get into the point of his existence in our lives for 40 years, and try to equate it to stars that are no longer viable stars in the heavens, that burn out, but they still look like they're alive, because the light takes so long to get to the earth. And now that he's gone, but he's still bright. So that was the metaphor, and it was just excruciating to get through. And when I finished, I walked off, and Janice was waiting for me as always, and Leno was there. And Jay and I had been friends for a long time. So I used to stay at his apartment in Boston in the 70s. And Jay's a great guy. And he was weeping. And I started, and we all just ended up hugging and crying. And that was it. It was so hard, and it's still so hard. And it's not about the talent, of course, extraordinary, one of a kind. But when you don't get friends like that very often, that's as rare as it comes. That's as rare as the stars in the sky, who was so devoted to you and would do anything for you, and in fact did, on so many levels. The funny, we had amazing laughs together, great creative times, of course, at the shows and all the different other shows we did together, appearances. But it was when the phone rang and it was him, and we could go off, and then we were two jazz men. Then we got new horns, let's try them out, let's see what,
No, the fun of watching some of those opening monologues with the three of you at the top of Comic Relief, where it's so clear that you guys were delighting in derailing this purpose because you were having so much fun.
Well, he was an amazing anarchist. He could just, it was the bridge on the River Kwai, and he was blowing up the bridge all the time, But we'd come out on the Tonight Show together when we were, plugging something together, or we went on Friends together. But he was my pal, and that loss is still, that's one, you always feel. I'll always feel that, Grateful for all the great times we had together, for all the smiles I still get when I think of him, and feel him around me sometimes. But that was the single hardest thing I ever had to do.
Well, we could spend a lot of time going through some of the other stuff at HBO.
Yeah.
But
well, my HBO specials I'm so proud of, because...
No, and I want to hit on one in particular.
Yeah, but sometimes I think they get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah.
Of things.
No, there's the
Don't get me started.
Which was the Marty DeBurgi one.
Yeah, I get Rob to play Marty DeBurgi, the Spinal Tap director. The concept was a spin on Sting's movie, which was called Bring On the Night, where he rented a house in the south of France to put together his new concert tour. I rent a house in Pasadena with a cast of characters to do a special. DeBurgi is making a documentary on the making of that special. In it was Buddy Young Jr., some of the best stuff I've ever done with him. Brother Theodore, who was hilarious Bavarian sit-down existential comic. Sammy, Chris Guest plays Chris Dementabella, the choreographer of the show.
That I think is sort of almost an embryonic version of Corky.
Oh,
for,
it is.
For,
It's
Waiting
not
for
even
Guffman.
embryonic, 'cause that's who it is.
Yeah.
And Eugene Levy plays a producer. And it's really inventive and really funny.
It's so
It's
good.
a really funny show. And then I think of my favorite of the 6 that I've done is Midnight Train to Moscow.
Now, whose idea was it for you to go to Moscow before the fall of the Soviet Union and do
Right.
a stand-up show?
Michael Fuchs.
Wow.
Michael is a genius at HBO and a champion for comic relief and a believer in me. Always would extend himself, and for the funny people. He was a great embracer of the artists, and he said, "Would you think about doing a show in Russia?" And I said, "Russia? Well, I think we should go over there and see if you can do a show there." Gorbachev was in power. It was still the Soviet Union. The wall had not come down. So we make a trip in April, a scouting trip, and we go to St. Petersburg, and we're there and we're meeting people and interviewing people and seeing about what's funny, trying to meet comics and see, and it's very bleak and so on. And then there's a train that you take, the midnight train, from St. Petersburg to Moscow. So I went, well, I got a title. So we take the midnight train, but now we're in Moscow. And lo and behold, a cousin of mine is there and telling me about all this family that we have in Moscow. So now that gets on my mind. That could be part of it. So now we're meeting all these people, and we go to interview Moscow's #1 comedian. And so our cameras are set up. We're in a restaurant in Red Square, and I've never met the guy. I don't know what he looks like, but people come to the doorway, and we're ready to go. Nah, it's not him. Another man comes. I could tell it's not him. Then a guy comes in the doorway and he walks through and he goes like this. I go, that's him. Him. And it was. And so he came down to the table and he sat, we meet, and he speaks a little English. And we start talking about stand-up. So I said, do you walk before a show? Because I never sit down once I enter the dressing room. And he goes, yes, I never sit down. Do you eat very early in the day? I don't have anything else. I said, do you like when your family's in the audience? He goes, no, I'm a Jew too. It was hilarious. It was absolutely hilarious. So then we go to see his show that night in a massive theater like this, and he sits at a table and he reads. He reads his material, which had been gone through by censors. So he wasn't free, and I felt so bad for him. Look what I was able to, observe and that I was going to do. So I realized I could do the show.
Now, did that make you feel daunted about how much freedom you would have in front of a Russian audience?
Yeah, but it was different for me because they weren't going to censor me, So we go to, I come home, and we write an interesting show, again with a beginning, a really interesting opening. Field of Dreams had just been a big hit. So I played me in a cornfield, and I hear this voice, like he heard the voice, if you build it, they will come, right? And I heard, if you go there, take a jacket. And I've got this cornfield, and if you go there, take a jacket. And my wife and now my younger daughter, Lindsay, are in, he's nuts, he's losing it. What's he doing? Why do we have this cornfield for, So then we're in bed in the show, and I see myself on stage in Russia, and then I wake up. I know why I have to go there. It's my grandmother. It's my grandmother's voice. She always used to say, if you're going, take a jacket. And it's her telling me to go home and do a show. that's what it's telling. So that was the beginning of the show.
Right.
And so we write the show, and we're at the Pushkin Theater where we're going to do the show. And I was thinking, all right, how can I perform for these people without insulting them? Because it's an easily a done thing to insult them because our idioms are different. If you say, "Oh, you're nuts," they take that very personally. You call me mentally ill? I mean, you have to be careful. So I thought, if I could come out and speak Russian for the first 5-6 minutes, that'll endear me, and I could be funny. And so we write a monologue in English, jokes, and I brought this man in who translated them into Russian, and I learned them in Russian.
Now, how did you learn the Russian?
I learned it phonetically, and then I got it, and
How long did that take?
month and 2 months, something like that. So I did that. I knew I had that, and then when I was there on the scouting trip in Leningrad, they had a television show called The Little Jew. The Little Jew was Charlie Chaplin. So they showed Chaplin movies, but they called him The Little Jew. That was the name of the show, was The Little Jew. Because Chaplin's mother was Jewish. So he was identified as a Jew, but that's what they called him, not the little tramp, the little Jew. So I created a Chaplin silent movie that I did live with all Russian music underscoring it,
Right.
played by my brilliant friend Mark Shaman, live on a piano. And it was Charlie falling in love with somebody in a restaurant, and this girl, and he flirts with her, and then the girl, of course, has a boyfriend, and he's left out in the cold. Sort of typical Chaplin, but it was Russian based with the music and everything. So I did that. Then we took the cameras out onto the streets, and we did man on the street interviews on the streets of Moscow. And at around 3:30, 4 o'clock, everybody's drunk in Moscow. There's lines everywhere, and very poor at the time. This is 89. And we have a camera going, and this guy has a barrel full of pickles, and he's drunk, and he's talking, druzha, and he's saying that we should be friends, but it's thick Russian, and he's going on, and I said, no, Zsa Zsa didn't slap the cop. The cop slapped Zsa Zsa. And he doesn't know what I'm saying, and
Right.
doing stuff like that. We're at Lenin's tomb, and it's a changing of the guard, and they're doing the scary goose step, and the steps are. So I start singing. 1, singular sensation, every little step he makes. Da 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 da. 1. And it got really fun. And I played a number of different characters. So we had great makeup guys. Ken Chase did the makeup in the hotel that we were staying at.
I remember that you did your Aunt Sheila.
And Sheila. I did Marty Scorsese, Sheila Weinblatt, and an old jazz character named Lester Hawkins, an old jazz man, who had come to Russia in the late 30s, was about to play, and somebody yelled, "War!" And he never got a chance to play the blues. And it were all elaborate makeups. So I'd come into I had the same driver every day. So I'd come down as this old woman. And he'd look at, now that would be in the back of the car. Then the next day would be this African-American jazz musician with a clarinet who I played. He'd be in the car. And it got to a point where he'd just say, "Good morning, Bill," no matter who I was. But we do the show. I walk out, and I do the Russian jokes. And it just killed them. When I entered, excuse me, when I entered, I took my bow. We had posters around Moscow that all it said was an evening with an American comedian, lines around the block. And I don't know why I was not nervous for a second. I had nothing to lose. I thought if I got 6 minutes out of the stand-up with all the other stuff we would do, I'd be fine. I did an hour and 10 minutes. It was so freeing. They loved the Chaplin thing. I wrote a piece about a man online, waiting online, and that had been to America, and he had been to a supermarket, and he couldn't believe that there were strawberries without maggots in them, and raspberries and that don't have worms. He couldn't believe that, and it was very powerful. So I did stuff right in their face about who they were, but with love and affection at the same time. And on top of that, the cousin who had told me we had relatives there, we find 30 family members that we didn't know existed. So that's what the show became about also.
Right.
So here I am, as I told you 4 hours ago when we started this thing, performing for my relatives. So now I'm 12,000 miles away from that house, again performing for my relatives. So Midnight Train to Moscow won an Emmy, and to me, the degree of difficulty on the show was tremendous. To take a show to Russia and score was something I am really proud of doing.
And would that have been the first Emmy win for you?
I think it might have been.
Wow.
I don't.
So it must have been that much
No,
sweeter.
no. I had won for hosting the Grammys
Oh, okay.
and writing the Grammys.
Okay.
I think it was my third. I don't know. So many.
Well-
No, but that's a particularly satisfying show.
Sure.
And the lesson for creative people is don't say no. Don't say you can't. Take some point you may have to.
Mm-hmm.
But we did it the right way. We investigated, we researched it, and we found a way in. And the way in was honesty, and was with heart, and was with humor.
Well, now you have given us a way into this next section that's so important, which is your award show hosting,
Yeah.
which is, by the way, the perfect time for you to say to anyone watching this that we're almost at the halfway point.
I was clean shaven when it started. Yeah.
But so your award show hosting began with the Grammys. So do you want to talk about that before we get into the Oscars?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, because they were before the Oscars. The award show hosting, we started with Comic Relief,
Right.
and being out there with those guys. But to do something alone started with the Grammys, which I did 3 years, and had one writer, Robert Wall, and I, who had his own show called Arliss on HBO. Very funny guy. It was just us. 2 guys wrote the whole show. And right from the beginning, tried to make the job of a host more than just our next presenter is. So we try to do some sort of sketches and pieces, different kinds of things. So one in particular is with Bobby McFerrin, who can sound like a lot of different instruments. We did what I grew up watching, the young people's concerts hosted by Leonard Bernstein, where he would go through the orchestra. This is a flute, and the flute sounds like this, and the guy would say, this is a bass fiddle. He gives you the underlip. So Bobby could do all those with his voice. So we did a young people's concert. I was the host, and he was the orchestra. So the opening joke was, in the beginning, music started with the rhythmic sounds of cavemen hitting stones and rocks together. And he started doing this kind of sound effect. And little did they know that millions of years later, Michael Jackson would own their publishing. That was so that was the sketch, right? So we kept doing different kinds of things on the show. I remember Metallica did a number that tore the place apart, and I was at the podium after that, and I said that song, of course, was written by Steve Allen. Steve had written all kinds of great songs, and that got a big laugh. But for me, it was cool because it was reminiscent of my dad, who was an MC at these big concerts. And here I was at Radio City, just blocks from where the store was. And I'm hosting all of these jazz giants and music giants. And it was very cool. So 3 years of that was, I loved doing the Grammys. I really had a great time doing the Grammys. It's not, then it was a smaller kind of thing than it is now, with the stadium kind of thing. And it was great. But now movies had started to happen. And I got asked to present at the Oscars in a year that was a really bad year. It was no host. It was the Alan Carr produced year. Rob Lowe sang Big Wheel with Snow White. It was just a bad show. But I came out and I did a funny intro that worked really well. And I introduced Sammy and Gregory Hines, who did a tribute to tap dancing in movies, the Nicholas Brothers
Right,
and
because
Busby
that was the year they
Berkeley.
had that movie Tap out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was very comfortable. I now had done a couple of good movies, and Gil Cates became the producer of the Oscars, and he asked me to host it. And that was a thrill beyond thrills, was getting to do the Oscars, 1990.
So before we get to you doing it, did you grow up watching the Oscars?
Oh, yeah.
So what did that show and what did that gig mean to you?
Well, when you grow up and you're watching it on a little black and white television set, imagining what colors there were, and seeing all the amazing big movie stars, not even having seen the movies, and there they were. And Bob Hope, more than likely, was the host of every one of those. Only a couple of years he didn't that I remember. And now it's your job, and it was emotional that I got that job now. And I'm part of the movie world. So, wow, this is, Harry and Sally had been a big hit, so I was in the movie world, and now I'm running that show. And, when I watched as a kid, I'd have to go to sleep for school. So when I woke up the next morning and came to our little kitchenette, we didn't even have a kitchen, it was a kitchenette. In my cereal bowl would be a piece of paper with who won what on it that my mom would write out for me, so I'd know who the winners were, because when I had to go to sleep. Gregory Peck, To Kill a Mockingbird, whatever the thing was, So, but it was Bob. There was something so cool about how distinguished he was and how funny he was. And I didn't know his references. I didn't know that he never won one. I didn't know that was his hook into the, he said, well, welcome to the Oscars, or as I call it in my house, Passover. I didn't know that, but I laughed. But I loved the skill of how he seemed more important than the show sometimes. Right. He was so, Tails, he was so dapper. He was such an amazing career Bob Hope had. Maybe the greatest of all time. And
so how did that inform how you would take on this gig? Because you, more than any other host, I think in my lifetime, put a stamp on that show. How did you do that?
I wanted it to be mine. And I learned that from the Grammys. And I learned that from Comic Relief, that I couldn't just be stiff and go our next presenter. I had to bring a show to them. To me, the first 6-7 minutes of the Oscars was my show. And I wanted it to be about the show, but I wanted to let them know right away, you're safe. We're going to be good. It's going to be funny. It's going to be different. And there won't be Rob Lowe singing to Snow White. And so they had this whole thing about no musical numbers. We don't want musical numbers anymore, and so on and so forth. So when I was working on it with Robert, I said, well, but you know what? I want to do a number, but we'll say there's no musical numbers. You won't be hearing this, and then do one. So Mark Shaman and I and Bruce Valanche got together and wrote the Oscar medley. So we took the nominated films and wrote funny special material songs about each of the films. And it killed. It just was, it was really funny and different. And the show was a complicated show, as I remember. There were satellite feeds around the world, even to astronauts in the space shuttle. But we were around, there was events around the world. It was a very adventuresome kind of show. But it was really funny, you know. And the big story on that show was that Jack Nicholson had made this huge deal on Batman.
Right.
And it was basically, don't pay me, give me a piece of the movie kind of idea. And he had made a huge amount of money on the Batman, the first Batman. So I said, well, we got to talk about that. So I came out, and I got my couple of jokes going really good right from the beginning. They were very happy to see me, which made me feel great. I could feel it. But looking out over, you see Nicholson and Coppola and all these other big stars, and they're looking at you, and they want you to be great. It was so, and I really felt I'm really in show business now, and so I do some jokes about this, and then I said, boy, you know, Jack Nicholson made this huge deal, said something. Jack is so rich, Morgan Freeman drove him here tonight, and it got a scream. And he lit up, and I did a couple of others. He's so rich, he bought land in Japan. Big laughs. And he's so rich, John Peters still cuts his hair. You'll have to explain to the people at Emerson who John Peters was. And it got a scream. So I'm in. I got a huge hand, and it was like, ooh. I go off into my dressing room, and I got like an 18-minute break. And I'm going through my script. Oh, I only got like 4 more intros to do. Who is it? It's Jack and Warren. And I go, Jack and Warren who? Yeah, laughing from the other side of the door. I go, open the door. It's Nicholson and Beatty. Not a bad pair of bookends. And he says to me, he says, hey, kid, just want you to know, thanks for talking about my money. All of us are so happy you're doing the show. God damn it. Keep going at it. Do it for the rest of your life, all right? But Warren and I just want to say thanks for doing it. It really means a lot to us. We're going to have a little party at the Hacienda later. I said, he's got a Hacienda. And maybe you want to come over. If not, we'll find another time. Thanks again. Close the door and went, how amazing and generous was that of those two giant people to actors and representatives of the craft I was so happy to be a small part of. And that was the first one.
That was the first time you hosted. That's amazing.
Yeah, we've done 9 of them now, and each one, I'm so happy, so happy that I was given that opportunity. Some of my favorite moments have been on that stage.
Can I just touch on a few, and if I miss any, please throw in some of your favorites. But obviously, after doing City Slickers, you got to preside over when Jack Palance came to collect his Oscar. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. Doing City Slickers, which was a story that I had written, and then Lowell and Babalu, Ganza Mandel, and I did the screenplay for, was one of my favorite movies ever to do, and part of it was I got to work with Jack Palance. Jack was in the first movie I ever saw, which was Shane, and so now he's going to play the bad guy. Now, while we were writing it, I was very much Jack's voice in the writing room, coming up with some of his one-liners as we were going, hoping that we'd get him to do the movie, which we did, obviously. And he only shot 2 weeks on the film. And he wins a Golden Globe. And then I'm hosting the show, and he's nominated, of course. And then Whoopi reads his name as one of the nominees, and then I'm in the wings, and he wins. And I was so excited for him, with some bit of pleasure for myself and having helped that happen. But again, fate. First movie I ever saw, acting with him, Oscar he wins, I'm hosting. This is crazy. And he comes up on stage and takes a line from the movie and says it to the audience. He goes, "Billy Crystal, I crap bigger than him." Now, people didn't know that was a line from the movie. And I thought, why is he making fun of Bill? We like him. What was he doing that for? And then, but
That's
I
one
know
of Curly's great lines.
I know. And so, but they didn't realize it, so, and then he starts talking about being at a certain age, you do something, you think they're done, but you do this. Then he hits the ground, he does these one-arm push-ups. And he even mutters, "This is, be more fun if there's a hooker underneath you." I mean, the censor went, "Nah, it can't be out in the air, that's going to be cut, thank you."
I didn't know he said
He says
that.
all kinds of stuff.
Wow.
And so he goes off stage, and I'm in the wings with Bruce Valanche, who's a wonderful writer, and I go, "Guys, we got to run with this. We got to." So we start coming up with stuff about Jack, and that became the runner for that show. Jack Palance just bungee jumped off the Hollywood sign, got a big laugh. 5 minutes later, this just in, Jack Palance just won the New York State primary, big thing. There's a song from Hook. 40 kids are on stage, little kids are on stage. I come out at the end of it and I say, "Jack Palance is the father of all of these children." Got a big laugh. But then a moment happens in that show that's, I think, my proudest moment as a stand-up. I'm supposed to introduce Hal Roach. Hal Roach was one of the fathers of screen comedy, invented the two-reeler, had the Hal Roach Studios, teamed Laurel with Hardy, Our Gang, Little Rascal. All of that. He was a giant. He was 100 years old, and he was sitting in the second row, and I was supposed to introduce him, and he was just supposed to stand up and wave. So, and that was it. So I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, he's 100 years old, one of the giants of film comedy. I personally am so thrilled that he's here in person, Mr. Hal Roach." Well, he stands up and he waves. He gets a huge ovation. But then he starts talking without a microphone. And I'm 10 feet away, and it sounds like this. "Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. When all you wonderful people, I can't think, and I think about Buckwheat and Alfalfa, and Mr. Laurel, Mr. Hardy. We'd have a camera in the back of a truck heading down Culver Boulevard, and it would be wonderful. In 1938, I remember that Stan said to me, 'I have an idea,' and that became Way Out West, and then that was the most wonderful time ever. As World War II ended, and now I see a young man with a microphone trying to get it to him, and nothing. I remember Warren Beatty looking at me going, and I know the red light is on me, and you've got jokes flying through your brain, and then one just sort of stuck like a slot machine, and I went, "This is perfectly fitting. He got his start in silent films." And the audience went nuts, and and it saved the moment, I guess.
Talking about sticking the landing.
Yeah, and for me that was I walked off going, I even make a motion, I think, going, "Woof, fastball on the outside corner." And that was really for Rob, because I knew Rob was watching at home. I went, "Fastball on the outside corner." That was very satisfying. But pretty much all of them were. Some are better than others, but we then hit on the idea of opening the Oscars with putting myself in the nominated films. And those movie clips, when I go out on tour and do concerts, I show a compilation of the Oscar movies that we did, and they're beautifully done.
Totally. Troy Miller did that.
Troy, yeah. Troy Miller genius. We matched the other side of the sets from famous movies.
Well, I
So-
remember Letterman's cameo was particularly brilliant and very generous of him to.
Yeah, well, David had a rough experience the year before
Right.
hosting the show. Wasn't his favorite. Wasn't received great. And I had this idea at the end of The English Patient, with the scene in the film where he crashes the plane into the guy. So I said, David, if you're flying the plane into the ground at me, it'd be hilarious. It'll just be hilarious. And he goes, okay. He got it, and he did it great. And that was the first time we did the film compilation,
Yeah.
and it went. I can't tell you what it felt like. There was a screen that projected the movie. People were astonished that we had pulled this off. I was in Fargo. I was in Jerry Maguire. I was with Yoda. It's really funny. And at the end of it, after he wrecks the plane, I come running, and I ran right through the screen, from film to live, and the audience stood up. And then here's the most special moment of it all. My mom's in the audience. It's the only time she'd ever seen me do the Oscars live.
Wow.
This is the person who put the names in the cereal bowl. So, and then there she is, and we just looked at each other. And I'm telling you, I lost it for about 45 seconds, thinking about my life and how this had all happened for me, and why me, but it did, and here we are. So my time in the Oscars was a wonderfully creative experience for me and my writers and Troy and everybody who contributed to making one person look so good.
Well, listen, I'm being told we need to sum up, so I may have to jump over a couple of things.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
I talk too much.
No, you talk just fine. So I'm going to jump over a couple of things just to get to sort of some summing up questions, if that's okay. I hope you don't mind that I'm cutting.
No.
Okay. All right. So talk about the idea of mentoring, both mentors you have had and people that you feel you've been able to help mentor in this career.
Oh. Well, there were people who I sought out for advice. Larry Gelbart. I had written a script that would later become Mr. Saturday Night. Would he read it? We were parents together, PTA parents. Our kids went to school together, along with Mel Brooks and Bancroft. And so him, Carl Reiner, I consider that. Mel, I can call them. They're like uncles to me now, and I keep pinching myself as that can happen. I can talk to them about what I've done. What else could I do? And it's not exactly career mentoring. It's friendship mentoring at this point. Norman Lear, for sure. I think those are the people I so respect. I hope I'm not leaving anybody out. I probably am. But I think finding someone who can be impartial but insightful and important that way. And I think that's, for me, that's always been important. I think Robin and I, in that way, mentored each other in certain ways, more about personal things than about career things. Of course, we bounce funny things off each other, but life experiences that way. I mean, I have that with David, my manager, too, and that you work with people who you trust and who are friends, besides the business part of it, who you listen to. I think that's, but also, Janice is so wise and smart in knowing me and has great pointers on what to do, what to say, what not to do, what to say, what to wear, what to, in a
Right.
great way that I trust. And then, you learn to listen to your heart. You learn to listen. As you get older, you grow these kind of wise barnacles,
Hmm.
and it sort of helps you guide yourself.
What do you think is the best advice that anyone ever gave you about working in the industry? I love the Jack Rollins leave a tip story. Is there any other pearl that someone gave to you that you would want to pass along to the people watching this?
The Jack Rollins story to me is the story.
Really? Okay.
The leave a tip, that's giving of yourself.
Right.
That's using every little bit of yourself in an honest way. And, you hear it, he left it on the field. Leave it on the stage.
It's really interesting to me because I see this great continuum from the kinds of performers that inspired you, like someone like a Sid Caesar, someone like a Jonathan Winters, someone who had this array of gifts, to watch the kind of balletic performance that you would give every night doing 700 Sundays, where you're doing, the Super 8 movie, of your family that is like a great Chaplin-esque kind of
Right.
pantomime.
The
musical,
backyard barbecue thing.
the backyard barbecue,
Yeah.
right. I mean, the characters, the impressions, and I mean, even impressions, they're really almost little one-act plays.
Mm.
And there is this great continuum from sort of those performers, I think, to you in a way that seems so rare now. Are there performers that you are seeing that you feel are sort of taking that baton from you today?
No.
Why?
No,
I'm serious.
I don't know. I don't know if I think about it that way. I look at people who have longevity.
Hmm.
I look at people who mean something, and lead their life in a certain way, that have lasting half-lives,
Hmm.
for careers, and they're rare, to find those people who can do that. So I admire anyone who has the guts to get up there and do it. I'm talking about comedians, because it's such a rare thing to find someone who's a little different and special and smart.
So what advice would you give to a comic coming to you who's just trying to break out and get noticed and focus his or her work in a way that makes them break out? What advice would you give them now?
I say the same thing about leave a tip. I also say the same thing about be true to yourself. Don't work for what you think they want to see. Make them see what you want them to see. Be honest, be funny. Don't have to be crass. Just find a new way in that makes us go, ah.
What do you think is your proudest career achievement?
That I'm still here. I think that I've had a career that I didn't think I was. You never think of that. Hey, I'm 70 years old now. I'm still doing it and still have tons of stuff to do. My achievement is that I've lasted, and have had good successes in different forms. I was on a really great sitcom. I had success as a stand-up. I was successful on Broadway. I directed 3 movies. One of them got nominated for a Directors Guild and 12 Emmys. A movie called 61 about Maris and Mantle. I did these 6 specials. I was the first guy to go to Russia and do a show. I mean, there's a lot of I in this, and another good piece of advice I got was someone said to me, humble it up. So I'm just lucky that I'm still healthy. I got, and I'll leave you with this little story. Almost a 50-year marriage, 2 great daughters and husbands. They have 4 grandchildren. And when the little guy, he's now 8, He's very much like me. I see it. And when he was 3, he said, I want to be like Grandpa. I want to be a chameleon. Because he couldn't pronounce comedian. So I think that was like the coolest thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
It's
Billy.
been a pleasure. I'm exhausted.
All right. I think that's it. That's